I have with me today Todd Bubba Horwitz with over 44 years of stock trading experience, economy analysis. Todd, let's jump right into this. How are you doing today?
Stephen, great to be back with you. And yeah, 44 years of future stocks, options, the entire financial gamut.
Great. Well, people are concerned about this U.S. economy, the loss of strength of the U.S. dollar, the Biden administration. Let me jump right into something. About a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, you had said that you believe the major stock indexes, such as the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, would go down by around 50 to 60%. Do you still see these popular indexes going down, or have we reached a bottom and it's time to start going back up?
I think we're going a lot lower. I think that we only scratched the surface last year. I think you're already seeing this year the lack of activity, the way that the markets have been stuck in a consolidating range, other than the NASDAQ, and even the NASDAQ is somewhat in consolidation. I think you're seeing a very light volume is much easier to hold markets up. Now, we've all heard the rumors of the plunge protection team and whatever. And if you know what you're trying to buy as someone who's trying to prop up the markets, then it's a pretty simple task when volume is very low. And I have not seen in my 44 years volume at these types of levels on a consistent basis day by day. So yes, I'm still very much a believer that we're going much lower.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody pointed that out to me, and I thought that was a really good point, is that there are still trades happening, but it's at a much lower volume level. And so finding those ups and downs is a little bit harder than it used to be. I want to talk about somebody else with a lot of experience that you have been on the same show with. We have economist Harry Dent. He's going as far as saying that the S&P 500 could crash over 80% and the NASDAQ over 90%. He says that this would wipe out baby boomers and disrupt retirement for a decade. Do you think there's any truth to what he's saying, or is he being hyperbolic and letting his predictions go a little bit too wild?
I think he's being more hyperbolic. I think it's very hard to say exactly how much or when we're going to go down, which is why I can't pin it to a date, and which I give you a wider range. Some things are done for fear and for effect. And I just like to be able to just say it like it is. And again, I think he's right on the economy, but knowing how far we're going to go down, I mean, I don't believe that the United States is going to be wiped out. I mean, there's a possibility, but I don't think that I would be that much fear, nor do I want people to be that afraid of where we are. Because again, we've been through a lot in 150 years, or actually, in the country, 250 years, but the stock market in 150, and we have yet to see that kind of devastation yet. And I don't foresee it coming anytime soon.
Yeah, I almost wonder if he has like a libertarian thinking, in that, like, okay, it would go down that far if we had a true economy where the government and a central bank don't try their darndest to prop things up, save companies from bankruptcy, let the zombie companies wipe themselves out. In that kind of scenario, could we go down that low? Or do you think the Federal Reserve and the White House are going to do everything in their power, especially in an election year next year, to make sure this thing doesn't crash?
Well, I think they're going to try to make sure it doesn't crash. But I think one of the things that nobody's really talking about right now has been the overall destruction of small business. Again, we continue to see even the Russell, which is the small business index, basically, but smaller than that. The individual, excuse me, mom and pop that had the drugstore, the grocery store, they're all out of business. They were all forced out of business during COVID, and it was done more intentionally than it was done because of the actual failure. They weren't allowed to be open, so how could they make any money? And who's got that kind of money sitting around to pay rent and all the bills that are due? Versus they let Walmart and Walgreens and the big chains stay open. So you've destructed and hammered small business into oblivion. And that's where we really have to look at the bigger picture. You want to count all that in, yeah, we could be down 80% or 90% if you take the small business. And the problem is that we live in the Keynesian economy, which is based on supply side, which is the worst possible economy system you can have. not that Hayek or Austrian is that much better, but you have to be on demand. The same as inflation. Inflation should be good. Inflation is on heavy demand, not on trying to raise rates into a cycle to slow growth. You don't want to slow growth. You want the company, you want the country, the companies to keep on growing.
Yeah. So on that supply side, demand side, tell me if this is right, but under Ronald Reagan, when we had a very similar situation coming off of President Jimmy Carter, wasn't one of their, I think his name was Ari or Artie. He was the one that was helping walk Reagan through all this, but they were trying to get the US economy so productive that prices came down because there was a surplus of goods, versus right now, it's like they're just trying to keep things on the conveyor belt, and inflation continues to rise because there's just not enough goods for people to buy, and that drives the price up.
Well, again, I think there could be enough goods, and I think what you're really looking at here is that you have, if you remember that government and the Federal Reserve, they only create debt. They don't create product. They don't create profits. They create debt. And we've amassed a major amount of debt. And in fact, of course, we know that the debt ceiling conversation is coming in starting today. And you continue to raise your budget. I mean, we can certainly produce enough goods. We can produce enough oil. We can produce anything we want. But you're seeing, because of the high inflation, and that comes back to right down to debt. Okay, you're getting the old taxation without representation type of deal here. This is what we went to war for in 1776. And, again, this is bad inflation that is trying to be controlled and manipulated by the Federal Reserve, and which also shows you how bad the fiat currency system is. Not just the US dollar, but the rest of the fiat currency system around the world that has no backing. It's basically air. And that's what we're working off of, is air. And, I always ask the question, why would I, as a US producer, want a lower dollar so I could export more? Am I not really just lowering my price? So why not have a strong dollar and just lower my price? But again, that's for the genius economists that have no clue of how to actually understand an economy and how it works.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of worry right now in the banking sector. We're being told by supposedly the most brilliant minds in America, PhDs, but they've never really run a business. Inflation is transitory. These same characters are telling us the banking sector is fine. There's been a few little tremors, few little things that we've had to deal with. We were told the Silicon Valley Bank was only the only bank in danger. Then multiple small banks have failed. Then we had First Republic last week. Are we being lied to? And what do you think is the actual condition of the United States banking industry?
I think we're 100% being lied to. I think this is the same if you're a sports fan, when the coach gets the old vote of confidence from the owner, and of course 3 days later they fire him. If you remember back in 2008, Paulson came out in September and said that the banks were safe and sound. If you go back to 1929, Andrew Mellon came out and said the banks were safe and sound. What was the end result of both of those? I think that the banks are well over leveraged. I think there's too much of a scam going on in the banking system because, of course, the banks borrow from the Federal Reserve. That is what the interest rates are based on. When you hear the Fed talk about raising or declining rates, that is actually the banks lending rate to each other. Okay, that's the Fed lending to banks. When a bank can borrow from the Federal Reserve, okay, let's say $1 million, and take that money in as a liability, and then through accounting turn it into an asset, then they can lend out 10 million against that 1 million that they have a debt on. And that's the problem. The banks are too far over leveraged. The regional banking system is collapsing. And we're getting to a point where only the big banks will be around, because that's what the government at this particular stage wants. They want to destroy small business. That is the whole idea behind what we would call the Great Reset, and would bring us into, Marxism or communism.
Yeah. Well, they did a great job during the lockdowns of putting over 1 million American small businesses out of business. Meanwhile, like you say, the big box stores got bigger and bigger, took on, just gobs of government money and citizens' money. Speaking of money, where is the United States dollar going with big countries like Argentina and Brazil refusing to trade in US dollars? They seem to be leaning more and more towards really getting this BRIC nation's currency backed by a basket of commodities off the ground. Is the United States dollar going to fail overnight? Is it going to be a slow decline? It's obvious that we're losing our hegemony and dominance under the Biden administration. Not that that means that it wasn't already slipping, but this is the current administration, right? This is
It wasn't slipping anywhere near what it's slipping now. Again, I don't think anything is an overnight scenario. I mean, you're talking about a major power. We are still the world's reserve currency. Commodities are still necessarily benchmarked against the US dollar. Now, again, can that change at some point? Yeah, but I think that is when you see this digital currency that we're going to start using more and more of, you're going to probably see that be almost a world currency versus a China or a dollar, where it's one country that is the reserve currency. And that is directly correlated to this administration that is trying to destroy this country and the very fabric in which we live under. We've given up all of our power, to China, to Saudi Arabia, and the BS with Russia and the rhetoric about how the damage. Russia is flourishing throughout all this. And of course, you still have the war going on, which is for no reason. I mean, except for one reason: money. Okay. Wars go on for money, not for anything else. And that's what we're watching in Ukraine right now. But, the dollar will be the reserve currency until it's not. And I don't foresee it being done overnight because remember, you have central banks around the globe that are running a fraudulent fiat currency system backed by nothing that continue to devalue their currencies as we call it the race to zero, which is what really creates this massively high inflation.
Okay. All right. Speaking of inflation and central banks, the Federal Reserve last week again raised rates by 25 basis points, 0.25%. Do you think they're going to continue to raise rates to try to tamp down inflation? Or are they going to pause? Or are we going to see, as some people are hoping, an emergency rate drop?
I think they're going to continue to go higher. I don't see how they can possibly. They've made their bet, as they say, and now they're going to have to lie in it. And I think that the only way to stop it is to continue to hike rates. I don't see them stopping, excuse me, until the 10-year reaches about 6%. So we're about, we're at about 4% or a little bit less. I think the 10 years going to 6%, which is what every major loan and mortgage is based off of, is the 10-year notes. And I don't see them stopping. I think that they're clueless. They have no idea of what's going on. They have no idea about the economy, which is typical with economists. They tell you 10 years later, oh, we were in a recession in 2023. Well, the average consumer can tell you that they're in a recession right now.
Yeah, their wallets will tell you. Okay, so this is very simplistic, but is it safe to say that they're hoping inflation goes down and at some point the interest they're charging is equal to inflation, and then inflation comes down and then they will lower those rates? Because I know 2% is the goal, but my goodness, that is audacious at this point.
Well, first of all, we're probably somewhere in 20 plus, even though they tell us we're at 6.2. Again, I don't think that, the problem is that they have no plan. Very similar to the climate change type of situation. They don't have a plan. They tell you what it's going to cost you. They continue to cost you more money, but we have no idea how we're getting there. And interest rates have no business being at zero in the first place. Ben Bernanke tried to hike rates in 2013, and he gave into the markets when they had what they call the famous taper tantrum. Interest rates should be determined by what people are willing to pay for the money. And if you look at any of the smaller lenders and the peer-to-peer lenders, money is going for over 10%. Okay. So again, we had no reason to be in that position in the first place. We had no business bailing out banks in that place. We had no business bailing out any company. If a company isn't strong enough to survive, let it fail. You want to bail out somebody, bail out the customer, bail out the depositor. Don't bail out the company so they can go out and make billions of dollars more on the expense of the American taxpayer.
Yeah. That's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. Okay, final question. I know you're busy and have a busy day today. Is this good or bad for the middle class? Joe Biden has a new mortgage program where if you have taken years to cultivate and manicure your credit score to be a good, solid, high rate, and you have saved money and have a higher down payment, you're now being penalized. You're going to pay more for the American dream. Is this good or bad for the middle class?
How about moronic? Okay. How about as dumb as you could possibly be? Again, here you have another attempt to destroy the American dream of capitalism, the American dream of having the ability to make as much money as you can. You know, we often heard that 400,000 years ago was going to be the cap, and after you made 400,000, your taxes would go up dramatically. And I always said, well, hell, when I get to 400,000, I'm going to stop. Okay, I'll take off. And like when I was a salesman, I'd put the order in the bag and turn it in when the next quota came in. This is as dumb as you can possibly get. And of course, he's as dumb as you can possibly get. Nothing personal, but this is just a ridiculous proposal meant to destroy the entire capitalistic system.
Yeah. One last follow-up question. Is there any chance that this particular policy was drawn in crayon? Like, this seems like such an elementary mistake of this does not expand opportunity for the middle class. It actually hurts the middle class.
Penalizes the middle class for working hard and getting a good credit score. I think that this wasn't drawn in crayon. I think this was drawn with the same pencil or pen that they did with the student loan that they were going to erase. I think this is meant for votes because, of course, the very wealthy are going to vote where they're going to vote. The very poor are going to love this, okay, and they're going to, oh, I'm going to vote for these guys again. And again, this is about votes. This is never going to happen. There's no way that this law gets passed without a revolution in this country, okay? So this is all rhetoric. It is all garbage. And of course, it's meant to get votes, very similar to everything else that we see done to get votes.
So if people want to learn more about you, your program, your Monday night calls, what's the best thing for them to do?
Email me direct at bub@bubbatrading.com. I'll be happy to send you a link for the Monday call. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions that I've done for many. And it's great to hear from your listeners because they're very in tune and understand the market and they understand what you're trying to teach them. And also they can go to my website at bubbatrading.com.
Great. Todd Bubba Horwitz, thank you for being on today's show.
Stephen, always great to be with you. You're a breath of fresh air when it comes to the media business.
Thank you so much.